Welcome to A Little Too Quiet. This is the Ferndale Library podcast brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. Today we're talking about some of the history of our little library here, 1 mile north of Detroit, Michigan. I am Jeff Milo. I'm joined by producer and today co-host Kelly Bennett, and we're going to be talking about this particularly exciting period in our library's history where we were renovating this space and had to up and move the entire collection. It was quite an interesting time. It happened around 2007, and I am going to turn things over to our self-ascribed library pack rat, Kelly Bennett.
Hello.
So, we've been doing this podcast for a little bit, and it's been a blast, and we're really glad people are listening. We talked about some library history in the 90s and the early 2000s. Now we're getting into, let's say, 2007. I'm showing here in the February 2007, that's when City Council approved the Library Improvement Plan. And man, this library needed it,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went through my hoard.
Yeah, your little...
There's no other way to describe it. I have been transferring all of my files from computer to computer to computer. And so I had old calendars that I had made that were like our event calendars and posters and signs, telling library patrons when we would be closed and for what. And so I pieced together what at the time was very vivid, but now has faded a little bit.
Now, I'll speak personally. I joined this library in March 2010, and at that point, it had already been about, almost 1 full year since you guys had moved from our current location to a temporary location.
Yeah, so in looking, it looks like we closed over the holidays of December 2008 and then January 2009 to kind of begin the packing process. And then we closed the doors on March 6, 2009 to begin moving to 642, which was just down the street. It was like
a factory or something?
No, it was a BD's Mongolian barbecue. Not the actual restaurant, but like their corporate headquarters.
Okay.
Or like regional headquarters. So when we moved in, their little conference room had black walls and then a big orangey yellow wall with like the BD's Mongolian barbecue logo on it.
And flames, I bet.
Yes, there were flames. We painted over it, but it was kind of, I'll talk about the temporary location.
Yeah, of course.
Because our director at the time, Doug Raber, who came on to basically accomplish this renovation, he didn't want to close the library for a year. That's kind of nuts.
Right.
Especially since we'd been growing. Our, attendance of programs was going up. Our collection development was getting, strategic. So, depriving the library or the library patrons of us for that long wouldn't work, but we didn't know where we were going to move.
Right.
And this was like, we could walk. I mean, Doug and some of the rest of us walked back and forth between these two locations all the time.
It's like a quarter of a mile.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was so strangely shaped. Like you walked in, there's a reception area that we couldn't really use for anything.
Right.
Sometimes a Christmas tree would be up there. And then there was like a little office to the side, and then this weird hallway, and then you'd walk a little bit farther and there was like a warehouse space. And
we have to stress that it very much looked like a warehouse space. It was like a shop room floor and like ceilings 20 feet high, very cavernous.
Right. But, our architects that help us put together, the plan for this building, because I ran across a blueprint in my hoard of the temporary location where we were going to put everything.
I love that you still have that.
Why? Only for this. I knew,
of course. One day you'd be on a podcast.
I knew I'd be on a podcast about it. But, they did the measurements and like we literally brought our entire collection over there, and there was office space for staff. There was even a community room, for lack of a better word, that we could use for events. And we did. I think that's one of the coolest things about that. I'm sure there are a lot of libraries who are not as privileged as we were to have that kind of thing. So when they transition to a new space or they are renovating their old one, they kind of become, just a pickup location. Maybe they've got enough space for like computers. So patrons can come in and get work done, but they're not like a fully functioning, fun library. We had story times just as regularly as we did. We started new programming. I think we talked about with Darlene. That's where our first big read was. Like
that was the first big community-wide book club sort of event.
Right. That was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts.
Right.
Like, so, we did a big thing there. I did some crazy, do you remember this? Jesus Chainsaw Massacre?
Yes.
Came to the library and did like a weird reading/music thing. And we had a big kickoff event. That was June 4th of 2009 that we had a public open house at the temporary location.
So it's not exactly like you guys went into low power mode.
No.
There
was plenty of things that we started then that we do now. And I think that was part of it. It was just, it felt like a new beginning, and we had space to do it in. We even did a series of like YouTube videos called Between the Stacks that started at the temporary location. Like if you look those up, you could see Darlene and I 10 years ago with like head kerchiefs on, like showing people what moving looked like.
Right.
Because we didn't want to lose touch. I mean, there were periods of time where we were closed to the public so we could get things set up. So when we moved to that temporary location, there was, like I said, we closed March 6th. I think we had like a soft open sometime in early May.
I feel like I attended that.
When the groundbreaking over here was May 2nd.
Yeah.
And then we had a little thing over there to, as like a reception. And then the 4th was our public open house, June 4th. And that was probably the thing you came to because Motor City Midwives played that and High Speed Dubbing, I think.
High Speed Dubbing.
So we had like a big event over there. But there were these periods of closed time that we thought, we'll reach out on social media, we'll have videos so people know like we're not just hanging out and sitting around. Yeah, it was a really odd period, but I remember it being really fun because you could set up however you wanted. We had the stacks all set up. We continued to buy new materials for our patrons because we were going to be there about a year.
So it had to be business as usual.
Yeah. And it wasn't beautiful in there, but we did good work. There was computers set up for patrons to come in. Reference staff was working. We got some digital services. The location, it was fine. That was the thing. We even had, we bought a Dropbox that we knew we would only use for that location so that we could work like a normal library.
Yeah.
And the community room space was smaller. I think it was smaller than we had before. It's definitely smaller than what we had now. But
I feel like you could get 50 people in there.
You could probably squeeze 50 people in there.
Now, but I think it's worth noting how cool it is that you guys had the enthusiasm levels maintained.
Yeah.
Especially because that could be a scenario where any library could feel a sense of detachment and possibly even a little bit of this like panic or anxiety, like we are out of our home. And it was an interesting space. I got to go back to this sort of factory vibe. I think it was about the size of a little bit bigger than a gymnasium. And it was very much big, giant cube, high ceiling gymnasium feeling. And I'm there in late 2009 eating cake and being told that I am, in fact, in a library, completely unaware that in the future I'm going to be hired by this library. But I have to say, I was really kind of just feeling the vibe of the room and just realizing that, oh my gosh, this library can't be stopped.
Yeah, I think we were so grateful to the community to have had them approve this big millage and this big plan.
Almost on a 2-to-1 basis.
$7 million, or several $1 million, not seven.
Right.
Several $1 million new building.
Yeah.
Right as the economy took a tank.
Which is incredible to imagine.
And the great thing was, and I don't remember specifically discussing this, but 2008 was a bad time for a lot of people. 2008, 2009. And so to have the ability, because of this temporary location, to serve those people who really, really needed you at that time, free services, free entertainment, career help, that kind of stuff that a library sort of standardly does, to have taken that away from people or even like downsized it would have been a bummer. And I think that was sort of the feeling, okay, you approved this. It's going to take a while to get you this new cool place. But in the meantime, like, we're going to continue to work hard for you.
Yeah, it's such a moment of like a mixture of sort of stress and gratitude because like, oh, we have to, they supported us, but then we have to move and you have to wait and be patient. And then
right. And there were all these weird little closures. And as the time of the building being finished, anybody who's done a renovation project, even at their home, knows, I won't say nothing runs on time, but there's a constant shift of time frames. We had geothermal heating put in here. So they had to dig these several 100-foot like wells into the ground around this building.
Industrial shovels coming around. What do I want to call caterpillar things? Digging in real time.
Right. And then it's, so there's that hard work like that, but then some of it's very technical. And so you got to make sure the site is still good. They found tombstones in one of these holes.
Right.
And so work stopped for like a day or two to like research where those may have come from. Are we digging into an accidental cemetery?
Right.
It turned out there was a tombstone factory for all intents and purposes at that site, and they were tombstones that, didn't belong to anybody per se, but those little things could stop work.
Yeah.
Or, you had to get something approved, or, things didn't come in. So there was all these back and forth. I think we had month-to-month rent on the temp location for a while because we weren't sure. We were there a little over a year, apparently, because in my notes I have that we closed the temporary location May 21st, which I'm assuming was probably the week before Memorial Day.
Mm-hmm. No, I got to just interject here. We're coming up soon on a chat that we're going to have. This will come to your ears before you hear my chat with Ferndale's new superintendent and youth services librarian, Jordan Wright. Was surprised that I forgot to make a Simpsons reference to Superintendent Chalmers because I always like to make Simpsons references. So I'm going to make a Simpsons reference right now. There's an episode where they have to move the entire town and they put houses and buildings on the backs of semi-trucks and they move it down the road. And I got that image in my head when I tried to imagine the concept of moving a library.
It was fascinating.
Books and computers.
Yeah. I have lots of photos that I've dug up. There's this amazing company in Michigan called Corrigan, and one of their specialties is moving libraries. So
I love that that's a specialty.
They come in and they, for books, they put them on these rolling stacks, and they shrink wrap the entire stack. And then they can just roll it up into the truck, and then you take it to the other side and you unshrink wrap it, and somebody puts the books back on the shelves that are set up. So that was fascinating. And, if you've moved house, multiply it by 1,000 trying to move a library that has been in the same location since 1954. And some of the staff had been working here for over 20 years.
Right.
So you accumulate a lot of stuff. Library folks tend to save things, not necessarily that there's no value judgment there. But when you're moving, you don't really know what you're going to need.
Yeah.
So we moved some things that we shouldn't have because we ended up moving them like 3 times and then getting back here. The card catalogs come into mind, and it turned out there was no real space for it. So we ended up moving these giant, I think it's the one you ended up having at your house.
Yeah, my home.
I mean,
right
that
now.
thing is like 6 foot tall almost.
I believe it's almost 7 feet tall. Yeah.
Yeah. So that thing is made of solid maple.
Right.
And we moved it 3 times. VHS tapes, which it turned out we didn't have room to have them here.
Right.
So we moved those there, back, and then back again.
Any kids listening, card catalogs were the Google of the 1980s, and VHSs were the Netflix of the 1980s.
Right.
So.
But if you can imagine, especially if you loved working at your library, it'd be like moving your house 3 times.
Yeah, and what do you keep? You got to get your bed and your kitchen and what have you.
Right. We tried our best to purge things that we weren't going to use over there, but, you didn't really know until you were back in your new space how it was all going to fit together. So, there was some like, why did we do that? But, in retrospect, I'm sure the Corrigan guys were like,
Sure.
Yeah, you're about normal.
Sure.
That's what people do.
A couple of points I want to bring up to, I guess, maybe just encourage any other folks out there who do work at libraries, or if you just want to support your library. I wonder if this occurred to here, the voters here in Ferndale who were entering a mighty recession and then decided to support their library. This is a quote librarians love to throw around, and it's from author Ann Herbert, that libraries will get you through tough times of no money better than money will get you through times of no libraries. I don't know if the city realized at that time, but we totally demonstrated it.
We did, man, and it's the vibe.
Yeah.
I mean, we were growing so much even in that location. I can remember having meetings with that director and just like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? And we did it.
Yeah.
It was one thing libraries and librarians, as long as I've been in this world since 1995 when I was a kid, is that they find a way to make do with whatever they have, because a lot of times the budget, and hopefully this is changing, the budget isn't always great. And so, I'm sure you've witnessed programs that literally are like painting paper tubes, but because of the enthusiasm and because of the nature of the place, like kids are enjoying the heck out of that. And I think that was at work in the temporary location. It didn't feel like, oh, we're in this weird spot, we can't do that.
Right.
The conversation was going to happen. Maybe we couldn't do it.
Right.
But we would think about it. We would look at the logistics. We'd look at the space and go, let's give it a try.
Right. I think, and again, I'm talking about someone who joined this team late. Like I joined a month before we were done in the temporary space. So to look at what you guys were doing and say, oh, well, we're in this temporary factory gymnasium. Maybe we'll just lay low and not go for this, endowment for the arts, big read program party and have a costume party inside of this space. Maybe we won't No, you guys were like, yeah, we're going to do it.
Yeah. Do you remember the Halloween party?
I do. I was there, and I actually co-performed with one of the bands. So
yeah, so we had pretty locally famous band come and play, the Beggars and Carjack. That Halloween party was so nuts because of the shape of the building.
Right.
I thought we are clearly violating some codes here, because there'd be these narrow hallways, and a lot of libraries probably do this, but our big Halloween Spooktacular is kind of a massive event here. And
there's some bottlenecking.
There's bottlenecking, and you have stations, kids get candy, there's activities to stop. And so I can just remember hundreds of kids and parents cycling through this weird space, getting bottlenecked, and staff is just overwhelmed by the fact that people would still come to this event in this weird place, have as much fun as they would over here, stay and enjoy this show by these great bands.
Right.
The Beggars even rewrote one of their songs with Halloween lyrics.
For the
we
kids.
Just had so many people who were excited about this place, even in that weird location, and to have done those wild things over there. It just, anytime I feel I don't know, maybe we can't make this happen.
Right.
I try to think back, you made some craziness happen over there, and it was, enjoyed and accepted.
I think that I think it's just a good story to tell other libraries out there who are going to be, if they have gone through these moves or if they're about to. I mean, let's always never forget that the two lions in front of the New York Public Library are named Patience and Fortitude. So obviously you guys have a lot of fortitude moving back and forth, but there's a lot of patience involved in something like this, because it was kind of this 3-year run from we're going to close, a groundbreaking, and then 2010 July we're finally ready.
Well, yeah, and that was the other thing. As I was saying, things kept getting pushed back.
Yeah.
We planned a big gala, and the time was coming closer and closer. We didn't have any of the technology set up that we needed to have to open and be a library. So almost last minute, again, I was tracking through my files and my emails. I made a giant tiled and taped together poster that says why we're not ready, to tell the folks that came in, we want to be completely ready to serve you.
Yeah.
but we had already planned this party. I mean, I think I had like 5 bands booked in different locations in the library.
Right.
But we wanted people to come in and see what their money had bought and see this beautiful space. And then I think sometime like second or third week of August, we actually opened to the public.
Yes.
But that willingness to admit that things weren't going the way that they should and holding ourselves to that standard of we want to be fully ready for you to actually use this space instead of trying to like limp our way through.
Yeah.
We thought that would give a better impression once people came in to use this place, that we'd be ready to go.
Well, absolutely. Any library wants to endear itself to its community, and that kind of honesty truly endears.
Right. And, I'm sure there was people who were irritated, and there was a lot of stress on the staff and our director at the time, trying to go through these punch lists and these checklists of, is this ready? Is this up to code? What do we need to do to make sure this place is safe and ready to open? And then on top of that, you have, are the computers for our, service desks ready? Do they have what's loaded? We used to keep like DVDs and other like media behind the desk, and you'd like exchange a case for the thing. Well, there was no room in the back room for that. So we had to put all of our media out.
Right.
However, we had to also implement an RFID system. So while we were still closed to the public, you were here for this. We had 8 or 9 people working full shifts of physically tagging DVDs and CDs. I would say between CDs and DVDs, 6,000 items.
For sure.
And then I think me and one other person actually encoded all of those items over the course of like the next 2 days so that our materials, at least the higher risk ones, would be like safe, ready to check out before. And then we did the books as like a slower project as they came through. And not to jump too far ahead, but not even a year later, we ended up having to close for a catastrophic flood.
That'll probably be a whole other episode on this podcast.
But that's how we ended up actually finishing RFID tagging our books, because we had to be closed to the public because of, a variety of other things.
I was trying to remember if that was November of 2010 or November of 2011.
It was November of 2010.
Okay.
So we opened in August.
Yeah.
And closed again for 3 months.
Talk about the patience.
It was so...
Talk about the patience. I think just because this podcast will be ongoing as we tell more of the story of the history of the library, but I think that, we should just mention again, we had the fortitude to move these things and encode these things and just make sure everything was up to snuff. The community had the patience for us, and I think that is just amazing, and I think that you'll find that most communities will always have the patience for their libraries. I remember when I was going through trying to help with all that encoding, and it felt completely tedious and kind of exhausting and sort of like robotic work. I remember thinking to myself, it's worth it. And I think the community had unconsciously admitted, it's worth it. They believed it.
Yeah. That's still one of my proudest moments. Like it's always on my resume of tagging and encoding that stuff in less than a week with my staff who were like, oh, we have to do this. Okay, that's how we're gonna do it. And we sat at desks and just we chatted with each other. We listened to music. We just went for it. I remember my eyes feeling dry just because I was like staring at these things. But we made it happen because we were committed to having the materials out there for people to see, to make it easier for people to, check them out themselves as well. So it was all in the service of making the library work better and making things easier for patrons. Yeah, it was a wild little time. I would say, advice to anybody that is renovating, moving, is take a look at your plan. Make sure that all the basics are there, but don't necessarily exclude some wilder stuff. Maybe it's a time for you to partner with other locations in your area, other businesses. Maybe you have a community center where you could hold some of the concerts that you think you may have to cancel, or maybe you start something new in a park or, in the parking lot even.
Resiliency.
Just be resilient, think of it as a time of like growth and change and just sort of own it. There were times we were really stressed out, especially when it looked like we weren't going to meet our deadline to open, and we just kind of went, well, how can we make this as good as it can be with what we have? And that's, like I said, what libraries and librarians are good at doing is like, well, here's what we have, let's make the most of it.
Right on. Fortitude and patience. This has been another episode of A Little Too Quiet, and there's just so much history that we have to dive into in this library because this year marks the 90th anniversary of this library. We were at this location that we're currently inside right now since 1954, but we opened also in 1930 at another location. That's another story for another time. So is the flood that Kelly mentioned. We can talk about that later. And I do want to get into more history with her about the music programming that's been going on here at this library for another episode. You can find us everywhere that you are downloading your current podcasts. You should tell your friends about it. If you're out there on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. We will find some more library-loving listeners. Kelly Bennett's been here chatting about the history. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Jeff.
And I'm Jeff Milo. Thanks again for listening. We'll be giving you some more in a few days. Author interviews, artist interviews, and expanding upon the ways libraries evolved in the 21st century. It's a little too quiet.